nobody thought the small woman in the blood-stained scrubs was anything more than a tired civilian nurse. She was begging for a medevac chopper, screaming that her patients were going to die without transport. But the Marine commander, a man made of iron and strict orders, looked right through her. He told her to step aside, that his mission took priority over her charity work. He thought he was dealing with a frantic volunteer. He was wrong. Dead wrong. In the heat of the argument, he grabbed her arm to move her, and her sleeve tore. That was when he saw the ink on her bicep, a tattoo that stopped the entire unit cold. It wasn't just art, it was a ghost story, and the commander realized he had just declared war on a legend. Rain hammered against the reinforced glass of St. Jude's Medical Center in New Orleans, the sound deafening even over the screams of the injured. Hurricane Carter had made landfall 6 hours ago, tearing the roof off the triage center and flooding the basement generators. The hospital was running on backup power, adrenaline, and the sheer will of its staff. Sarah identifying the dead wasn't part of her job description, but tonight everyone was doing everything. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of a shaking hand. She was 34, though tonight she felt 50. Her scrubs, once a crisp navy blue, were darkened with the blood of strangers. "Nurse Jenkins, we're losing pressure in Trauma 4, a young resident shouted from down the hall. Sarah didn't run. She moved with the precise, terrifying efficiency of someone who had seen worse than this. She slid into Trauma 4, checked the lines, adjusted the clamp, and stabilized the weeping teenager on the gurney in under 30 seconds. "Keep the pressure manual if you have to, Dr. Lewis," Sarah said, her voice raspy but steady. "We aren't losing him." Outside, the roar of heavy engines cut through the storm. The distinctive thrum of military transport trucks vibrated the floorboards. "Thank God," Dr. Lewis breathed out. "The National Guard is here." Sarah moved to the window. It wasn't the Guard. 3 tactical vehicles, Humvees painted in matte camouflage, were tearing through the flooded parking lot, pushing abandoned sedans out of the way with their bull bars. Marines. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The National Guard brought blankets and water. Marines brought orders. Within minutes, the double doors of the ER burst open. A squad of 6 men in full tactical gear, soaked to the bone, marched in. They didn't look like rescuers. They looked like they were securing a perimeter. At the front was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Commander Silas Graves stood 6'3", his jawline covered in a day's worth of stubble, his eyes scanning the chaos with detached judgment. He dripped rainwater onto the linoleum, seemingly unbothered by the cold or the misery around him. "I need the Chief of Medicine," Graves barked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried instantly. The room went silent. Dr. Aris, the frazzled chief, stepped forward, his white coat stained yellow with iodine. "I'm Dr. Aris. Thank God you're here. We need generators. We need—" "Doctor!" Graves cut him off, his tone flat. "I am Commander Graves, 2nd Battalion. We are commandeering this facility as a forward operating base for Sector 4 search and recovery. I need this floor cleared of civilians within the hour. We have high-value assets and injured personnel incoming from the levee breach." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah stepped out from behind the nursing station. She walked right up to the commander, stopping 2 feet from his chest. She had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. "You're evicting critical patients?" Sarah asked. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. Graves looked down, his eyes flicking over her messy bun and bloodied scrubs. He dismissed her instantly. "We are relocating stable individuals to the high school gymnasium 3 miles east. My medics will take over this trauma bay for our casualties." "The high school is flooded," Sarah said, holding her ground. "And these people aren't stable. That boy in Trauma 4 has a perforated lung. Moving him kills him. Graves stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. It usually worked. I have orders, miss. The levee breach has compromised the naval depot. My men are bleeding out there. This hospital is the only secure structure with a helipad. Now, step aside and let the professionals work. Professionals? Sarah let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You think you're the only professional in the room because you're holding a rifle? I have 3 nurses keeping 60 people alive with flashlights and duct tape. You aren't taking this floor. Graves's face darkened. He signaled to 2 of his men. Escort the nurse out. She's obstructing a military operation. Don't touch me, Sarah snapped, stepping back. I'm the charge nurse. By federal law, during a declared disaster, medical triage authority remains with the attending physician until formally relieved by a medical officer. You're infantry commander. You don't have the jurisdiction to tell me who lives and who dies in this hallway. Graves stared at her. He wasn't used to resistance, certainly not from a tired-looking woman in soaked sneakers. I don't have time for a civics lesson, Graves growled. Sergeant, move the patients. Start with the ambulatory ones. If she gets in the way, detain her. You move 1 patient, Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, and I will personally ensure your career ends in a court-martial so fast your head will spin. Graves leaned in, his nose inches from hers. You have no idea who you're talking to, nurse. I've led men through hell and back. I don't take threats from civilians. And I don't take orders from tourists, Sarah fired back. The air in the room crackled. For a second, it looked like Graves might actually arrest her. But then the lights flickered and died completely. The backup generator had failed. Ventilators! Sarah screamed, spinning around, the argument instantly forgotten. Get the bag valve masks! Manually bag them now! She rushed past Graves, slamming her shoulder into his tactical vest as she ran toward the critical wing. Graves stood there for a moment, stunned by her sudden switch from defiance to action. Commander, his sergeant asked, do we clear them? Graves watched the small nurse leap onto a gurney and begin chest compressions on an elderly man, shouting counts in the pitch blackness. Secure the perimeter, Graves said, his jaw tight. Let them stay. For now. The darkness of the hospital was heavy, smelling of antiseptic and rising floodwater. Flashlights cut through the gloom like lightsabers. For 3 hours, an uneasy truce held. Graves and his Marines occupied the East Wing, setting up comms and treating their own wounded. Sarah and her staff held the West Wing, manually pumping air into patients' lungs and hand-suturing wounds by the light of cell phones. But the situation was critical. The diesel needed for the last emergency generator was gone. Without power, the 6 patients on life support, including the boy in Trauma 4, had maybe 2 hours before the manual pumps became insufficient. Sarah knew what she had to do. She grabbed a heavy trauma kit and marched toward the East Wing. 2 Marines blocked her path with rifles crossed. Let me through, she said. Commander's orders. No civilians in the secure zone, one Marine said, though he looked apologetic. Tell Commander Graves that if he doesn't give me 5 gallons of diesel from his Humvees, he's going to have 6 corpses to explain to the press. The doors swung open. Graves stood there, looking over a map spread on a gurney. He looked up, his face exhausted. You're persistent, I'll give you that, Graves said. I need fuel, Sarah demanded. Your trucks are idling outside. Siphon it. Now. Graves sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. My trucks are running comms equipment that is coordinating the rescue of 3,000 people trapped on rooftops. If I cut the engines, the signal dies. If the signal dies, people drown. It's a numbers game, Nurse Jenkins. Cold arithmetic. These are people, Sarah hissed, pointing back toward her wing, not numbers. One of them is a 6-year-old girl with asthma who needs a nebulizer that won't work without power." Graves looked at her with a strange mix of pity and annoyance. "I can't help everyone. Neither can you. In the field, you learn to cut your losses. Triage isn't about saving everyone. It's about saving who you can." "Don't lecture me on triage," Sarah said, her hands balling into fists. "Then stop acting like a bleeding heart." Graves slammed his hand on the table. "I have 12 Marines unaccounted for in the 9th Ward. I am not shutting down my comms to power a nebulizer for one kid. You heartless son of a—" Sarah lunged forward, not to attack him, but to grab the radio handset on the table, intending to call for outside help herself. Graves caught her wrist. His grip was like a vice. "That is military property. Stand down." "Let go of me!" Sarah struggled, twisting her arm. She was strong, stronger than she looked, and she used her body weight to try and break his grip. "I said stand down!" Graves shouted, yanking her arm back forcefully to subdue her. The violent motion caused the shoulder of her scrub top to rip. The fabric, already weakened from hours of sweat and snagging on equipment, tore clean away from the collarbone down to her bicep. Sarah stumbled back, panting, clutching her torn shirt. Graves opened his mouth to reprimand her, to tell her she was under arrest. But the words died in his throat. His flashlight beam hit her exposed left shoulder. There, stark against her pale skin, was a tattoo. It wasn't a butterfly or a flower. It was black ink, faded by sun and time, but unmistakable to anyone who had served in the elite circles of the armed forces. It was a skull wearing a combat medic's helmet, crossed with a syringe and a K-bar knife. Below it were the coordinates of the Korangal Valley and the call sign, Valkyrie 1 Actual. The room went dead silent. The 2 Marines by the door lowered their rifles, their eyes widening. Graves stared at the tattoo. He blinked, thinking he was hallucinating from fatigue. He knew that insignia. Every Marine in Special Operations knew that insignia. It belonged to the legendary Combat Search and Rescue Unit that had operated off the books in Afghanistan a decade ago. The unit that went into places where the SEALs refused to go. And Valkyrie, that was the call sign of the medic who had single-handedly dragged a force recon team out of a burning ambush in the 16. A medic who was rumored to have been a woman, though most dismissed it as a myth. Graves slowly lifted his eyes from her arm to her face. He really looked at her for the first time. He saw the scar running into her hairline. He saw the way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, ready to strike. "Where did you get that?" Graves whispered, his voice hoarse. Sarah didn't cover the tattoo. She straightened her spine, her eyes burning with a cold, hard fire that suddenly made her look 10 feet tall. "I earned it, Commander," she said, her voice devoid of the frantic civilian tone she had used earlier. Now, she sounded like an officer. "Korangal Valley, Operation Red Wings 2. I was the one who patched up your XO when he took a sniper round to the femoral artery." Graves felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the story. His executive officer, Major Miller, spoke of the angel of death who had saved him. "You're Sarah Jenkins?" Graves asked. "Staff Sergeant Jenkins?" "It was Lieutenant Jenkins when I discharged," she corrected him icily. "Now, are you going to give me that diesel, or do I have to incapacitate you and take it?" Graves stared at her. The dynamic in the room had shifted so violently he felt vertigo. This wasn't a civilian nurse. This was a war hero who outranked him in experience, if not current commission. He looked at his sergeant. "Drain the Humvees," Graves ordered quietly. "Leave enough for one truck to idle. Give her everything else." "Sir?" the sergeant asked, confused by the sudden flip. "Do it!" Graves roared, and get a corpsman in here to help her fix her scrubs. Move!" Sarah didn't say thank you. She just nodded, a sharp, military nod, and turned on her heel to return to her patients. Graves watched her go, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. He had almost arrested the Valkyrie. The diesel generator hummed a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, a heartbeat keeping the hospital alive. With the lights back on, the horrors of the triage unit were illuminated in high definition. Sarah didn't stop. She moved from patient to patient, checking vitals, adjusting IV drips, and calming terrified relatives. But the dynamic in the room had shifted irrevocably. The Marines who had previously looked at the hospital staff as obstacles now watched Sarah with a mix of wariness and awe. The word had spread efficiently, as rumors always do in a unit. "The nurse is a Valkyrie." Commander Graves stood by the nursing station, holding a lukewarm cup of instant coffee. He watched her work. He noticed things he had missed before. The way she taped her own knuckles to prevent blistering. The way she conserved movement, never taking a step she didn't need to take. It was a combat economy of motion. He walked over to where she was treating a young corporal, Private Davis, whose leg had been crushed by falling debris. The military medic, a young man named Henderson, was struggling to find a vein for a morphine line in the boy's collapsed circulatory system. "Move," Sarah said softly. Henderson looked at Graves. Graves nodded. Sarah took the needle. She didn't hunt or peck. She palpated the boy's arm once, closed her eyes for a split second to visualize the anatomy, and slid the catheter in perfectly on the first try. Private Davis let out a ragged breath of relief as the drugs hit his system. "You haven't lost your touch," Graves said, his voice low so only she could hear. Sarah didn't look up. She taped the line down. "Veins are veins, Commander, whether it's a muddy ditch in Kandahar or a flooded hospital in New Orleans." "I looked up your file on the SAT link," Graves admitted. "Silver Star, Navy Cross. You disappeared after 2018. Discharged on medical. PTSD?" Sarah finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with exhaustion. "Something like that. I got tired of putting people back together, just so you boys could send them out to get torn apart again." "Major Miller, the XO you saved. He talks about you every year on the anniversary of the ambush," Graves said, trying to bridge the gap. "He says you ran through a mortar barrage to get to him. He says he owes you his life and his leg." "Tell Miller to eat more fiber and watch his cholesterol," Sarah said dryly, turning to check the next chart. "That will save his life more than I ever did." Graves blocked her path, not aggressively this time, but with a respectful insistence. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant." "Don't call me that. I'm not an officer anymore. I'm a nurse." "I owe you an apology, Nurse Jenkins," Graves corrected himself. "I almost compromised this facility because I was too arrogant to listen. We're used to being the saviors. It's hard to admit when we're the ones in the way." Sarah sighed, leaning back against the counter for a brief second of respite. "You have a job to do, Commander. I get it. The mission comes first. But in my world, the patient is the mission. And right now, my mission is breathing, and yours is just waiting for a radio signal." Before Graves could respond, a tremor shook the building. It wasn't the wind. It was deep, structural. The floor beneath them groaned. Dr. Aris came running from the stairwell, his face pale. "The water is rising faster than predicted. The basement walls are buckling. If the retaining wall in the sub-level gives way, the foundation goes." Sarah pushed off the counter instantly. "The generator is in the sub-level." "If we lose the generator again," Dr. Aris stammered, "the ventilators stop, permanently." Graves was already speaking into his radio. "Squad 2, I need a structural assessment on the basement level. Now." Static crackled back. "Sir, we can't get down there. The stairwell is flooding. Water pressure is jamming the fire doors." Sarah grabbed a heavy flashlight. "There's a maintenance hatch behind the laundry chutes. It bypasses the main stairs." Graves looked at her. "Show me." "I'm going with you," she said. "Negative." Graves shook his head. "It's unstable. I'm not risking a civilian." He stopped himself, seeing the look in her eyes. "I'm not risking the charge, nurse." "I know how to prime the fuel pump if it floods," Sarah said, walking past him. "You don't. You can shoot the water, Commander, but I don't think it'll surrender. You need me." Graves stared at her retreating back, a smirk ghosting his lips. "Marine is on me. We're following the nurse." The maintenance shaft was a claustrophobic nightmare of dripping pipes and rusted steel. The air grew colder and smelled of brackish swamp water the deeper they descended. Sarah led the way, sliding down the ladder with practiced ease, her boots clanging rhythmically on the rungs. Graves followed, with two of his men, Corporal Hayes and Private Miller, bringing up the rear. "Watch your footing," Sarah called up, her voice echoing. "The condensation makes these rungs slick." They reached the sub-level utility corridor. It was already ankle-deep in black, freezing water. The roar of the storm outside was muffled here, replaced by the terrifying sound of rushing water pressing against concrete. "The generator room is at the end of the hall," Sarah shouted over the noise. They slogged through the water. As they reached the heavy steel door of the generator room, the water level rose to their knees. The door was buckled inward slightly. "Pressure differential," Graves noted. "If we open this, it might flood the room instantly." "If we don't," Sarah yelled, "the intake valves will clog with silt and the engine will seize." Graves nodded to Hayes. "Help me with the wheel." The two men strained against the iron wheel of the watertight door. With a groan of tortured metal, it turned. They cracked the door open. Water sprayed through, but the room itself was still mostly dry. The pumps were working overtime, screaming as they ejected water back out. They slipped inside and sealed the door behind them. The generator was a massive yellow beast, roaring deafeningly. But Sarah was right. The intake line was vibrating violently. "It's sucking air and mud." Sarah rushed to the machine, ignoring the heat radiating off it. "I need to bypass the primary filter." "What do you need?" Graves shouted, moving to her side. "Wrench! There, on the wall." Graves grabbed a massive pipe wrench and handed it to her. He watched as she expertly loosened a pressurized valve. Hot steam hissed out, scalding her forearm, but she didn't flinch. She twisted a bypass lever and hammered the pipe to clear the sediment. The engine sputtered, choked, and then roared back to a smooth, consistent rhythm. "Got it!" she yelled. Suddenly, a boom echoed through the room. A high-pressure pipe on the far wall burst, shooting a jet of freezing floodwater across the room like a fire hose. "The retaining wall is breaching!" Hayes screamed. The water level in the room began to rise rapidly, inches in seconds. "We need to go," Graves ordered. "This room is going to fill." "We can't leave it," Sarah argued. "If the water touches the alternator, the power shorts." "We can't stop the ocean, Sarah." Graves grabbed her harness. "We have to seal the room and hope the pumps hold. If we stay, we drown." They scrambled back to the door. The water was already at their waists. The pressure against the door from the hallway was immense. "Push!" Graves roared. Graves, Hayes, and Miller threw their shoulders against the steel door. It wouldn't budge. The hallway outside had flooded completely. They were trapped. "Damn it!" Graves slammed his fist against the steel. He looked around the room. The water was rising. The generator was chugging away, but the water was creeping toward the electrical components. Sarah looked up. "The ventilation shaft." She pointed to a grate near the ceiling, about 12 feet up. "It's too high," Miller shouted. "Build a platform," Sarah commanded. "Use the supply crates." The four of them worked in a frenzy, stacking plastic crates and equipment boxes in the rising water. The generator's roar was terrifying, mixing with the sound of water gushing in from the burst pipe. Graves boosted Miller up first. The private kicked the grate open and scrambled into the duct. "Hayes, go!" Graves ordered. Hayes went next. Graves turned to Sarah. The water was at her chest. She was shivering violently now, the adrenaline fading into hypothermia. "You're next," Graves said. "The alternator," Sarah chattered, her teeth clicking. "It needs to be covered." She ripped a heavy tarpaulin from a stack of supplies and threw it over the electrical head of the generator, securing it with bungee cords. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to buy a few more minutes of power. "Sarah!" Graves grabbed her by the waist and hoisted her up. She was light, but dead weight from the cold. She grabbed the edge of the vent. Miller and Hayes grabbed her arms and hauled her up. She turned back, looking down into the swirling black water. "Graves, take my hand!" The water was now at Graves's neck. He jumped, grabbing the edge of the vent. Sarah and the Marines grabbed his tactical vest and pulled. He tumbled into the metal duct just as the generator below them sputtered. The lights in the shaft flickered, dimmed, but miraculously stayed on. The tarp was working. They lay there in the cramped, dusty metal tunnel, gasping for breath, soaked and shivering. Graves looked at Sarah. Her face was smeared with grease and mud, her hair plastered to her skull. She looked like she had just come out of a blast crater. "You're insane," Graves wheezed, a laugh bubbling up in his chest. "You're absolutely certifiable." Sarah managed a weak smile. "That's what the VA keeps telling me." Getting back to the triage floor took 20 minutes of crawling through ducts and dropping down a service hatch in the linen closet. When they spilled out onto the dry floor of the second level, the nurses and patients looked at them like they were ghosts returning from the sea. Dr. Aris ran over. The lights flickered. "We thought we lost you." "The generator is on borrowed time," Graves said, standing up and wringing water out of his sleeves. "Maybe an hour. Maybe 2. We need evacuation now." "Sir." The radio operator, a corporal sitting by the window, waved frantically. "I have contact. Southern Command is online." Graves rushed to the radio. Sarah followed, wrapping a dry blanket around her shoulders. "This is Valkyrie Actual," Graves said into the handset, using his unit call sign. "Status report, critical. We have severe flooding, structural compromise, requesting immediate extraction for 60 civilians and 12 military personnel. Over." The voice on the other end was clear, cutting through the static with the cold precision of bureaucracy. "Valkyrie Actual, this is Kingpin. Negative on full extraction. Conditions are red flagged for heavy lift birds. We cannot land a Chinook on that roof in these winds." "We can't stay here, Kingpin. The building is going down," Graves shouted. "Copy Actual. We have a window for 1 Black Hawk, 1 bird only. ETA 10 minutes. Priority extraction order is in effect." 1 Black Hawk. It could hold maybe 10 people, 12 if they stripped the seats. "Understood," Graves said, his face tightening. "I'm loading the critical patients. Pediatric cases first." There was a pause on the radio, a long, heavy silence. "Negative Actual. Priority extraction order 7 Alpha. You are to secure the high-value asset located in ICU bed 3. Senator Nathaniel Thorne. He was brought in prior to the storm with cardiac distress. Your orders are to secure the senator, his staff, and your unit. Leave the civilians. Repeat. Civilians are to shelter in place until the storm passes." Sarah froze. She was standing close enough to hear the voice in the earpiece. She looked at ICU bed 3. A man in his 60s, grey-haired, currently sitting up and demanding a bottle of water from a nurse. Senator Thorne, the man who had voted against the Veteran Affairs Expansion Bill 3 years ago, the man who had called the Afghan withdrawal a strategic realignment while her friends were dying at the airport gates. Graves gripped the handset so tight the plastic creaked. Kingpin, say again. You want me to leave 40 critical patients and 20 staff in a collapsing building to save one politician? Those are orders from the Joint Chiefs, Commander. Senator Thorne is a Tier 1 national asset. His survival is paramount to national security. Secure him. Get your men on the bird. That is a direct order. Kingpin out. The line went dead. Graves slowly lowered the handset. He stared at the wall. The room was silent. The Marines around him were watching him. They knew the code 7 Alpha. They knew what it meant. Save the VIP. Screw the rest. Sarah stepped in front of him. The blanket slipped off her shoulders, revealing the tattoo again. You aren't actually considering this, she said. Her voice wasn't pleading. It was an accusation. Graves looked at her. His eyes were haunted. Those are direct orders, Sarah. If I disobey, I'm court-martialed. My men lose their pensions. They go to the brig. If you obey, Sarah said, pointing a shaking finger at the pediatric ward where 3 children were sharing a single oxygen tank, you aren't a Marine. You're a mercenary. It's not that simple, Graves snapped, the stress finally cracking his armor. I don't make the policy. I just execute it. That's the excuse every coward has used since the beginning of time, Sarah yelled. You saw the basement. You know this building won't last the night. If you take that chopper and leave us, you are killing everyone in this room. Senator Thorne, sensing the commotion, stood up and walked over, flanked by a nervous-looking aide. Commander Graves, is it? Thorne said, his voice booming with the practiced authority of a career politician. I understand the extraction is inbound. Excellent work. My aide has my bags ready. We should prioritize my security detail. Graves looked at the senator. He looked clean, well-fed. He was complaining about the humidity, while a woman 5 feet away was silently weeping over her husband's body. Then Graves looked at Sarah. He looked at the mud on her face, the blood on her scrubs, the tattoo on her arm that marked her as one of the few who had truly given everything. The sound of rotor blades began to thump in the distance. The Black Hawk was coming. Commander, Thorne said impatiently, I expect your men to carry my luggage. I have a bad back. Graves closed his eyes for a second. He took a deep breath. When he opened them, the conflict was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. He turned to his sergeant. Sergeant, take the senator and his aide to the stairwell. Excellent, Thorne said, straightening his tie. And lock them in the janitor's closet, Graves finished. Thorne's jaw dropped. Excuse me? You heard me, Graves said, his voice flat. Sergeant, secure the senator. If he speaks, gag him. Commander, Thorne shrieked, as 2 large Marines grabbed his arms. This is treason. I will have you buried under the jail. Do you know who I am? Yeah, Graves said, stepping close to the politician. You're a stable ambulatory male with a minor cardiac arrhythmia. That puts you triage category green, back of the line. He turned to Sarah. Get the kids, Graves said. Get the criticals. We're loading this bird until it can barely lift off. My men stay. I stay. You go. Sarah stared at him. You're throwing your career away. I'm doing my job, Graves said, picking up a crate of ammo. Like you said, the patient is the mission. I'm not leaving, Sarah said firmly. Sarah, I'm not leaving my hospital, Silas, she said, using his first name for the first time. Load the kids. Load the elderly. But I stay until the last one is out. Graves looked at her, and for the first time in 20 years of service, he smiled. A genuine human smile. Right, he said. Then let's get to work. We have a helicopter to hijack." Rain lashed against the rooftop of St. Jude's like bullets. The wind howled, a banshee scream that threatened to tear the very concrete from its rebar. The Black Hawk helicopter had come and gone, a fleeting angel in the storm. It had lifted off 10 minutes ago, carrying 12 pediatric patients and 4 critical trauma cases. Silence returned to the roof, heavier than before. Commander Graves stood near the edge, watching the red tail lights of the chopper disappear into the churning grey clouds. He was soaked, his boots heavy with water, his career effectively over. Sarah stood beside him. She didn't shiver anymore. The cold had settled deep into her bones, past the point of shaking. "That was the last of the fuel for the sector," Graves said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Kingpin made it clear. No second trip." "We bought them a chance," Sarah said. "That's more than they had an hour ago." Inside the stairwell, the remaining Marines were moving the rest of the patients up to the 3rd floor. The water was rising fast now. The basement was gone. The 1st floor was an aquarium. The structural groans of the building were becoming more frequent, sickening cracks that vibrated through the soles of their feet. "Commander!" The shout came from the stairwell door. Sergeant Miller burst out, looking frantic. "Sir, it's the senator. He's got the radio." Graves spun around, his eyes narrowing. "What?" Graves and Sarah sprinted back into the stairwell. On the 3rd floor landing, chaos had erupted. Senator Thorne had somehow convinced a young, terrified private to unlock the janitor's closet under the guise of a medical emergency. Now, Thorne stood by the comms unit, the handset clutched in his manicured hand, screaming into the frequency. "This is Senator Nathaniel Thorne. I am being held hostage by rogue military elements. I demand immediate extraction. I demand a strike team." Graves crossed the distance in 2 strides. He didn't yell. He didn't negotiate. He simply ripped the handset from the senator's grip and shoved the man back against the wall. "You seek to destroy us all!" Graves snarled. "You're finished, Graves!" Thorne spat, his face purple with rage. "I've just broadcasted your mutiny on an open channel. They're sending MPs, not rescuers. You'll rot in Leavenworth." Sarah stepped forward, picking up the handset Graves had dropped. She looked at the display. The channel was still open. The entire Southern Command network was listening. "This is Valkyrie 1 Actual," Sarah spoke into the mic. Her voice was calm, distinct, and carried a weight that cut through the static. There was a pause on the line. Then a new voice broke in. Not the bureaucratic drone of Kingpin, but a rough, jagged voice that sounded like gravel in a blender. "Valkyrie 1 Actual, identify. That call sign has been dark for 6 years." Sarah's eyes locked with Graves. She knew who was on the other end. "General Miller," Sarah said. "This is former Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins. I am currently at St. Jude's Medical Center. Commander Silas Graves has just saved 40 civilian lives in defiance of unlawful orders. We are currently drowning. We have 62 souls left, hostile waters, and a politician who thinks his suit is worth more than a child's life. We need an extract, General, and I'm calling in the favor." Silence stretched over the radio waves. Major Miller, now General Miller, was the man whose leg Sarah had saved in the Korangal Valley. The man who had sworn he owed her a life. "Jenkins," Miller's voice came back, thick with emotion. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet, sir, but the water is at the 2nd floor." "Kingpin is blocking assets," Miller growled. "But Kingpin doesn't command the 160th SAW. I have training birds in Florida, night stalkers. They're unauthorized for this sector, and the weather is suicide." "We like suicide odds, General," Sarah said, a small smile touching her lips. "Hang tight, Valkyrie. We're coming." Miller out. The radio clicked off. Thorne stared at Sarah, his mouth agape. Who did you just call?" "The cavalry," Sarah said, dropping the handset. But the building didn't care about the cavalry. A massive boom shook the foundation. The eastern wall of the hospital gave way. "Everyone to the roof!" Graves roared. "Move! Now!" The next hour was a blur of terror. The water didn't just rise, it chased them. It surged up the stairwells, black and hungry. Graves carried a woman with a broken hip. Sarah carried oxygen tanks. The Marines formed a human chain, passing patients up the slick stairs as the concrete crumbled beneath them. They made it to the roof just as the third floor collapsed into the floodwaters. The hospital was now an island of concrete in a sea of destruction, listing dangerously to the side. 50 people huddled under tarps in the driving rain. Senator Thorne sat alone, shivering, clutching his briefcase, looking small and pathetic against the magnitude of the storm. Graves sat next to Sarah against the parapet wall. He offered her a protein bar he had fished from his vest. "If Miller doesn't make it," Graves said quietly, staring out at the dark horizon. "He'll make it," Sarah said, taking the bar. "If he doesn't," Graves continued, "I want you to know, I'd make the same choice again. Even without the radio call, even without the rescue." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, too exhausted to maintain professional distance. "I know, Silas. That's why you're a good Marine. You finally figured out what the uniform is for." "To protect," he whispered. "To serve," she finished. And then, above the howling wind, a sound. Not the heavy thump of a Black Hawk, but the high-pitched whine of modified engines. Lights appeared in the clouds. Not one. Three MH-47 Chinooks, the heavy lifters of the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, broke through the cloud ceiling. They didn't land. The roof was too unstable. They hovered with impossible precision, ramps lowered, ladders dropping down like fingers from heaven. "Go!" Graves shouted, pulling Sarah up. "Get them on the ladders." 3 months had passed since the floodwaters of Hurricane Carter receded, leaving New Orleans scarred, but standing. However, for Commander Silas Graves, the storm had never truly ended. It had simply moved from the streets of the French Quarter to a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom at Naval Station Norfolk. The air conditioning in the courtroom hummed with a low, artificial drone, fighting a losing battle against the Virginia humidity. But Graves felt cold. He sat at the defendant's table, his back rigid, his dress blues pressed to knife-edge perfection. The rows of ribbons on his chest, campaign medals, commendations, stars earned in deserts and jungles, seemed heavy today, like weights pulling him down rather than honors lifting him up. Across the aisle, the prosecution team looked confident. They had stacked the deck efficiently. The charges were severe: mutiny, kidnapping of a federal official, misappropriation of government property, and conduct unbecoming an officer. On the witness stand sat Senator Nathaniel Thorne. He looked rested, tanned, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal Italian suit. He dabbed at his forehead with a silk handkerchief, playing the victim with practiced ease. "The commander was unhinged," Thorne testified, his voice trembling slightly for effect. He looked at the jury, a panel of 9 senior officers, their faces unreadable masks of stone. "We were in a crisis. The building was collapsing. I tried to establish order, to ensure that we followed the chain of command regarding the evacuation protocols. But Commander Graves, he snapped." The prosecutor, Colonel Sterling, walked slowly toward the stand. "Snapped, Senator? In what way?" "He became violent," Thorne said, pointing a shaking finger at Graves. "He physically assaulted me. He ordered his men to lock me in a janitor's closet like a common criminal. He was screaming about how my life didn't matter. He effectively held me hostage while he played hero with his girlfriend. That nurse! Graves clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. He stared straight ahead, refusing to give Thorne the satisfaction of a reaction. So, Sterling continued, you believe his decisions were driven by a personal relationship with this civilian nurse, rather than tactical necessity? Absolutely, Thorne nodded vigorously. He risked a high-value national asset, me, and defied direct orders from Southern Command just to impress a woman. It was reckless. It was criminal. Thank you, Senator, Sterling said, smirking slightly as he sat down. Graves's defense attorney, Lieutenant Commander Holloway, looked tired. He leaned over to Graves. It doesn't look good, Silas. Southern Command is backing Thorne's version. They don't want the PR nightmare of admitting they ordered you to abandon civilians. Without a corroborating witness who isn't one of your own Marines, it's your word against a United States Senator. I know, Graves whispered. Call the next witness. Holloway stood up, adjusting his glasses. The defense calls its final witness. We call Sarah Jenkins. A murmur ran through the gallery. The press had painted Sarah as a local nurse, a bystander caught in the crossfire. Thorne rolled his eyes, clearly expecting a weeping, emotional plea from a civilian. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The room didn't just go silent, the air was sucked out of it. Sarah Jenkins walked in. But this wasn't the woman in blood-stained scrubs, nor was it the civilian in jeans. She was wearing the full dress blue uniform of a Navy corpsman, first class. The uniform was tailored perfectly, fit for inspection. But it was what was pinned to her chest that made the senior officers on the jury sit up straight in their chairs. At the top of her rack sat the Navy Cross. Beside it, the Silver Star. Below those, the Purple Heart, with a gold star indicating a second award. And on her left shoulder, the patch of the elite Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman. She walked with a cadence that couldn't be faked, the rhythmic, predatory grace of a combat veteran. She passed the prosecution table without a glance, marched to the witness stand, and took the oath with a crisp, clear voice. Thorne's jaw had dropped. He whispered furiously to the prosecutor, "I thought you said she was a nurse." "She is," Colonel Sterling whispered back, looking pale. "But you didn't tell me she was that kind of nurse." Holloway approached the stand, looking more confident now. "State your name and rank for the record." "Sarah Jenkins, Hospital Corpsman First Class, United States Navy, retired. Former call sign, Valkyrie 1 Actual." One of the generals on the jury leaned forward, breaking protocol. "The Valkyrie from the Korangal Valley extraction?" Sarah met the general's eyes. "Yes, sir." The general slowly leaned back, his demeanor shifting from judgment to intense curiosity. "Ms. Jenkins," Holloway continued, "you were present on the roof of St. Jude's Medical Center. You heard Senator Thorne's testimony. Is it accurate?" "It is a fabrication," Sarah said coldly. "Senator Thorne attempted to commandeer a rescue helicopter designated for pediatric trauma patients. When Commander Graves refused an unlawful order to abandon civilians, Senator Thorne attempted to bribe a junior Marine to shoot the commander." "Objection," Colonel Sterling jumped up. "This is hearsay. The witness is clearly biased due to a personal relationship with the accused." "I have proof," Sarah cut through the objection, her voice sharp as a scalpel. She reached into the pocket of her uniform jacket and pulled out a small plastic bag containing a black SD card. The St. Jude's security system was hardwired into the emergency battery grid, Sarah explained, holding the bag up for the jury. The floodwaters destroyed the servers in the basement, but the local cache on the third floor remained intact. I retrieved this drive 5 minutes before the building collapsed. It contains high-definition audio and video of the entire incident on the triage floor. Thorne turned a color that didn't exist in nature, somewhere between grey and sick green. This is a trick. That evidence was not entered into discovery. It was submitted to the Judge Advocate General this morning, Sarah said calmly. It has been authenticated by Cyber Command. The judge, a stern rear admiral with bushy eyebrows, looked at the prosecutor. Colonel Sterling, do you want to view the evidence before I play it for the court? Sterling looked at Thorne, who was now sweating profusely. We have no objection to the truth, Your Honor. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. On the large screens mounted on the walls, the grainy black and white footage of the flooded hospital hallway flickered to life. The audio was hauntingly clear, the sound of rain, the wheezing of patients, and then the booming voice of Senator Thorne. I don't care about the kids. Get me on that chopper. I am a Tier 1 asset. Their lives are meaningless compared to mine. The gallery gasped. The sheer callousness of the voice echoed off the wood paneling. Then Graves's voice, calm and steady. The patient is the mission. The video continued. It showed Thorne grabbing a young private by the vest, shaking him. I will give you $50,000 to put a bullet in his leg. Shoot him. That is an order from a United States Senator. The video cut to black. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. Sarah looked directly at Thorne. You wanted to know who I was, Senator? I'm the one who documents the body count. Thorne slumped in his chair, looking small and defeated. His high-priced suit suddenly looked like a costume. The jury didn't even leave the room to deliberate. The head of the panel, a Marine colonel with a scar running down his cheek, stood up immediately. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked, though the answer was obvious. We have, Your Honor, the colonel barked, on all specifications and charges, not guilty. Furthermore, this panel recommends that the Judge Advocate General immediately open an investigation into Senator Nathaniel Thorne for solicitation of murder, interference with a military operation, and cowardice. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Commander Graves, the judge said, looking at Silas. You are reinstated with full honors. Dismissed. Pandemonium erupted. The press broke through the bailiffs, shouting questions. MPs moved in to surround Senator Thorne, who was now weeping into his hands. Graves didn't look at the chaos. He only looked at Sarah. She gave him a single, sharp nod, a warrior's salute, and turned to leave through the side exit. 20 minutes later, the sun was blindingly bright outside the courthouse. Graves walked down the marble steps, his sea bag over his shoulder. He felt lighter than he had in years. The heavy weight of command, the doubt, the fear that the system was broken, it had all lifted. He found her leaning against the hood of a silver sedan in the parking lot, away from the media circus. She had taken off her dress jacket, folding it neatly over her arm. In her white shirt and tie, she looked less like the mythical Valkyrie and more like the woman who had shared a protein bar with him in the rain. Graves stopped a few feet away. You kept the drive. I told you, Sarah said, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. I like insurance. You risked a lot wearing that uniform today, Graves said softly. You came out of the shadows. The press is going to be all over you. The quiet life is over. Some things are worth the noise, Sarah shrugged. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. So, you're a free man. Southern Command offered you a promotion, didn't they? A desk job at the Pentagon? Apology tour? They did, Graves admitted. Full bird colonel, air conditioning, no heavy lifting. Sounds nice, Sarah said. Safe. I turned it down, Graves said. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Oh, I resigned my commission 10 minutes ago, Graves said. He dropped his bag on the pavement. I realized something in that courtroom. I've spent 20 years fighting for a government that was willing to bury me to save a politician. I'm done fighting for the system. So what will you fight for? Sarah asked. People, Graves said simply. Just people. He took a step closer to her. I heard a rumor that the new director of emergency operations at the rebuilt St. Jude's is looking for a chief of logistics, someone who can handle high-stress environments, someone stubborn. Sarah laughed, a genuine bright sound that chased away the last of the courtroom's gloom. The pay is terrible, Silas, and the boss is a nightmare. She has strict rules about coffee consumption, and she yells when people touch her triage charts. I think I can handle the boss. Graves smiled, reaching out to take her hand, his rough, callous fingers interlaced with hers. I survived a hurricane with her. I can survive the paperwork. Sarah squeezed his hand. The interview process is pretty grueling, she warned. It involves buying me a very expensive steak dinner and listening to me complain about the hospital board for at least 2 hours. I'm driving, Graves said, opening the car door for her. Good, Sarah replied, sliding into the passenger seat and looking up at him with a warmth that promised a future far brighter than their past. Because I'm tired of being the only one steering the ship. Graves closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and looked back at the courthouse one last time. He saw the MPs escorting Thorne into a van. He saw the generals arguing with the press. He turned his back on it all, got into the car with the woman who had saved his life, and drove away. The war was over. The peace had just begun. That is the story of Commander Silas Graves and Nurse Sarah Jenkins. It serves as a powerful reminder that true honor isn't found in a rank or a title, but in the choices we make when the world is falling apart. Graves thought he was the ultimate authority until he met a woman whose courage outstripped his own. In the end, the civilian obstacle he tried to remove became the warrior who saved his life and his soul. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. If we were standing in that flooded hallway, forced to choose between our career and doing what is right, would we have the strength to disobey? If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It helps these stories reach more people. Don't forget to share this with a friend who needs a reminder that heroes are real, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new drama. Thank you for watching.